in the road, because here we are in Coatbridge tonight for the 52nd meeting of the wee ALBA book tour. So this is... And it's on the 6th of April, a very important day in the annals of Scottish independence, the day that the Declaration of Roath was sealed. And what better way to celebrate that day than here in Coatbridge at the Eagle Inn.
Where are you here?
I'm sitting there, Tasmina. Phone off just in case.
Do we need mics? We just start? Am I just
I
starting?
don't know, do we need a mic? I don't know what the voice is.
Am I just... Can you hear me? Yep, we're ready. Right, good evening everybody. Oh, look at you, way up the back. Let's have a wave way up the back. Good to see you. You know how to get the punters in, don't you? Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and as always, can I thank the lovely guys from Indie Live for joining us here. As Alex said, 703 years ago to the very day the Declaration of Arbroath was signed, so how auspicious that we all meet here today at the Eagle Inn in Coatbridge. And I wonder if what those Scottish barons would have thought 703 years ago, that we would still be here and still fighting for independence, but here we are. And we are on, as Alex has said, our 52nd Wee ALBA book meeting, and given that the Wee ALBA book came out only in March 2022, that pretty much means 52 meetings on that we've had a meeting every single week since the book came out. And for that, I'd like to thank two people, the women who organised them all. Denise Findlay, where are you, Denise? And the man to my left who's never stopped marching for and fighting for independence, Alex Salmond. Well, it's been a busy week in Scotland, and it's great to be here as part of the independence movement, which is, of course, to quote someone, a big tent. And a big tent is, some of you are really sharp tonight. This side less so. You'll need to up your game here on the left, but the right are getting it totally. Anyway, the most important thing we can learn from the events of the past few months is that independence is bigger than and has to be bigger than any political party, any individual person, because it has to be about all of us. And some may forget, but it is absolutely worthwhile paying tribute to all of those people who kept marching, who kept doing the meetings, who kept talking about independence when the politicians were asleep at the wheel and cosy at their seats in both parliaments across Scotland and down at Westminster. And I pay tribute to all of those and very much look forward to the All Under One Banner March on the same day as the so-called King-to-be's coronation on the 6th of May. So we look forward to seeing who attends which big events. But I know which one I'm speaking at, and it's not the coronation. Now, you're not here to hear from me, I'm just here to set the scene and introduce, first of all, to say a few words, the publican, and I'm sure Republican, your favourite publican, Robert Slavin, who was, of course, a candidate for us in the elections last year. We didn't quite get him across the line, but I can think of no better person to represent the people of Coatbridge and indeed a constituency in Scotland than Robert Slavin. Let's give him a good welcome.
Thanks very much for that, Taz. I don't know what to say when saying all that. I feel a wee bit overwhelmed. To tonight, thanks very much for everybody that's come along here tonight. You know, I'm looking around the faces, people I don't know, some people I do know, a lot of regulars in here as well. Coatbridge was a yes voting city. Yes. North Lanarkshire was. We're delighted we're back on the march. And I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I really feel we've turned a corner. The last 6-7 weeks, we've turned a corner, especially this week as well. You know, this is the 52nd ALBA Blue Book event. We went to the first one. Good, delighted. A few of the guys I went up to Stirling to see it, and it was fantastic. Alex was speaking with the guy there. What I bring up for is because the boy there, Bill Cowney, his name was, and he was a former councillor for the SNP, but he was going to stand for ALBA in the elections last year. And the Bill was obviously a councillor, he was an activist. He must have gave up so much of his time for Scottish independence, but felt the SNP had left him, and he came to ALBA. So those kind of folk, you start thinking on them, and you see, you know, how much they've given up their whole lives, and they realise the SNP let them down so much. But on that night as well, there was another guy there, a guy called Chris, who was sitting next to us. He was from just outside Stirling. So I get talking to you, as you do, you get talking to him, just where you from, Coatbridge, blah, 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 talking about. And what he said, I'm actually a member of the SNP and a member of ALBA. You know, he said, I'm here to listen to what Alex got to say, I want to hear that. And at the end of the talk, after we'd done the event, he's like, that was, couldn't say, but bro, that was brilliant, you know what I mean? But I would imagine Chris is one of those boys, he's one of the 30,000 that left the SNP last year, over this year, the way things have went, you know what I mean? They've lost so many members. Why they've not addressed it, I don't know. But in another point I say as well, if any of us in here believe the SNP have got 72,000 members, with 22,000 have never voted in the most important election in the last 20 years for a leader of the SNP. Listen, I've got a second-hand horse cocked with an 11-point plan on it, you know what I mean? You can buy that if you want. But we're here tonight, I think, as I say, the positivity, but the mood music in the independence is, we went from a funeral march into a fiesta. You know, you can feel it. I don't know, there seems to be a weight lifted. If I didn't know better, I'd say Alex and Taz are piping in Scots with hate in the ALBA members' bedrooms in the morning. We're all getting up like that. Something's happening here, this is great. But we can see it tonight, you know what I mean? You can feel the vibe in the room. And it's been going that way since the man's that done the first Blue Book event. For the first one, we've moved. I went to ones in Dundee, Filter the Brum, in Edinburgh, Broxburn. We've been everywhere, you know what I mean? And every time you go, there's been great speakers. Kenny McCaskill in here with Tommy Sheridan one of the times as well, come in and done it. They were brilliant, you know what I mean? You learn so much. And it's just, I just think it's a delight to see as many of us in here all marching in the one direction. And I think what Taz was saying there, it's not to one party, it's not to one person, it's for all of us in the independent movement. That's why we need a convention. That's why it was sad, I think, that either Ash Regan or Kate Forbes never got the job. If they'd have got it, they were open to that suggestion and that policy. We all get together, and it'd have made things so much easier. But I do think that'll come. That's got to happen. I think there's too many SNP voters, members now realise it's the only way forward. We can't just have one person dictating and it's up to them to say we're going for one here, we're going for one there. We can't have that anymore. You know, I mean, my journey in politics is a very brief one, I would say. You know, I'm probably like the rest of you. 2014, always yes in here, and always the yes stuff up behind the bar. Just as one of those things. But back then it was not so much a gamble. As I say, Coatbridge, I reckon even now there's 80% of the people here in Coatbridge want independence, maybe 20% don't. The 20% that don't certainly don't drink in here. You know, because what they're doing, they're sitting in the rich gaffs, you know what I mean? They're in the other pockets. I've got all the tradies in here, but the people that want hope, want something different, they're drinking here. So I'm quite happy to make sure that this pub, that's a rebel headquarters. I say that's what we're going to make it till we get our independence, and I'll make sure this pub's in the front of it. But as we move forward, it's amazing when you look back, just all the, I hate saying that, like the carrots we've got, I know it's a trope, everybody says it, but the endless promises we've had, the amount of times we all voted for SNP to get its independence, we had in 2016, 2017, 19, 21, we were always promised it, and even this year was a no ifs, no buts referendum in October 19. That's all swept away, it's all gone. No de facto referendum, None of that. But what all our votes were given there on the promise of it. There's so many mandates lying in the dust, you know, and it's shocking. Not even that the mandates are lying in the dust. There's people that have given up their whole lives, decades of their lives for the SNP, for Scottish independence, and they'd love the chance to have those mandates. And they're gone. They're now in the annals of history. So we've got to form something new, and that's what we're doing. And we've got the man that's going to do it, the man with a plan, I call. You know, we've got him in there. In 2014, just getting back to it, very much, yes, there was a lot of younger boys now. Christ, the young boys are 30 now, you know what I mean? They're not so young anymore. But we've done a lot of stuff now for the Yes campaign in here. Unfortunately, we just didn't get there. But I will say this. Sometimes you argue on Twitter and Facebook and all the rest of it. They say Alex failed. Alex never failed. 53% of Indigenous voters and Scottish voters voted yes. Who voted no? The people who voted no, the ones that fell for Project Fear, was like the European community, which a lot of them are away now. A lot of them voted no. The military personnel, the ones we see at holiday homes, all them diluted the vote. But Indigenous Scots, we voted yes. That man won it. Just a different kind of franchise. But we'll get there again. That's something we're going to have to work towards. But I joined the SNP in 2017. The reason I joined in 2017 was because Phil Boswell, who won his seat in 2015, get deposed. And I'm like, no way, can't have that. You know what I mean? Couldn't have that. So I said, I'll go and join. And stupidly enough, and naive, I'd probably say enough, I went to the Coatbridge CNC, Christen, SNP branch. I was thinking it was like 2014 again. We always sailing down the river, Kumbaya, the whole bit. I was a nest of vipers, man. You know what I mean? I'll tell you, never seen anything like that in my life before. I just didn't realise it because I'd come from like the Yes campaign where everybody was together, everybody was united. It was a broad tent. Everybody was for everybody. If you were yes, we all backed each other up. I went into that meeting first, and boy, oh boy, I'll tell you guys, I was shocked, absolutely shocked. Stuck with it. I went. I campaigned for Stephen Bonner as well. Quite like Stephen Bonner, you know what I mean? I'm going to say, to me, he was a working class guy. He's been and got a pint and all the rest of it. But as an MP, not really done anything, has he? You know what I mean? He's not done much, and I fear for him. If he's not fearing himself, he better start fearing, because I think his jacket's on a sugary nail. You know what I mean? Not that it's going to come from us. End of the day, you know what I mean? It's going to come from elsewhere. This particular area, North Lanarkshire, very much a Labour stronghold throughout the years. Alex probably not. The SNP had to fight to get a toehold in. And Phil Boswell got there, deposed Tom Clark after 34 years, and when Phil got out of the way, tried to get back there. But it was a short, brief period, I would say, in the SNP, because even I could see after Brexit we were getting nowhere. You know what I mean? There was no many open doors. We weren't getting anywhere. And I did many arguments with my dad. We go walking all the time. And he's like, we're never getting independence with Sturgeon. I'm like, well, I probably fell for the 7-dimensional chess and she's got a secret plan. I must admit, I probably fell for that as well. We fell out, but it wasn't until January, the 31st of January 2020, when Nicola Sturgeon, after all the bombast for Ian Blackford and all the rest of it, Scottish people will have a vote. Scotland's got a voice. We will not be dragged out of Europe. What did we do? We didn't even go out with a whimper, we went with a fart. That's what we went with, you know what I mean? It was terrible. So after that, that was enough for me, you know what I mean? Enough for the SNP, it was gone. I actually joined Now Scotland, you know what I mean, in lap, and it wasn't until Alex came along and was asked to take control of the ALBA party that I realised that's my home. That's what this guy wants, independence, doesn't want anything else. So it's up to us, everybody in here, to make sure we carry that flag. We make sure we carry it strong, fast. We're sitting here in the Declaration of Arbroath 703 years ago. No more can I say. We've got so many people in here tonight that's ready to fight for that cause. So I'm going to leave you over to Mr. Salmond.
No, you're not. You're going to pass over to me first.
Sorry. Sorry. Do you know what? I feel like Alex, he does that all the time by passages. Sorry. So I shall pass over to the lovely Tasmina, and she's going to conduct it from there.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Very Jay. Very cool.
Before I introduce Alex, I want to pick up on a couple of things that Robert said, and that's because I see Mr. Majid sitting in the front here, and it reminded me, you were talking about the number of people who voted yes in the referendum. Now, as a proud Scottish Asian, one who believes in biology and women, by the way. We are not all the same. As one who believes in that, I can say that had you left it to us, Scottish Asians, in 2014, we would be independent by now because we all voted for it. But lesson to be learned for next time round. But Robert mentioned something I thought we should pay tribute to. As is often the case, people say Wee Blue Book by mistake when they mean the Wee ALBA book. But it's worthwhile saying it because the Wee Blue Book had a huge part to play in the referendum of 2014. And the journalism of Stuart Campbell deserves a round of applause and much respect. Now, as Robert says, we've just celebrated our second birthday. We're a young party, but we beat the Greens in our most recent council by-election. All good or bad things must come to an end. And also the recent polls have shown us at 5% now, with 5% across Scotland, we would see ALBA MSPs returned in the Scottish Parliament. We would see the return of Alex Salmond to the Scottish Parliament. And we would all see a leaders' debate that involved Douglas Ross, Alex Cole-Hamilton, Anna Sauer, Hamza Youssef and Alex Salmond. I'm not a betting woman, as you know, but I would put my house on Alex winning that debate hands down. So let's make it happen. And one of Alex's responsibilities, and he's just kept going regardless. Don't we know it? Still he's standing, still he's fighting, and no one will keep him down, at least not until we get independence. So please join me as he rises to speak about how we achieve our noble goal in welcoming the wonderful Alex Salmond.
Well, Robert and Tasmina, I was thinking there about the 52 meetings of the wee ALBA book. And of course, I didn't calculate, there has been a wee meeting of the wee ALBA book here before, was there not? Yes. The only one is that they didn't invite me to that meeting. But it still remains the fact that Coatbridge is the only place in Scotland which has had 2 meetings over the last year. Now, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, what does that make the folk in Coatbridge? Bloody greedy. That's what you are. And today, the anniversary of the sealing of the Declaration of Arbroath. That's a significant, it should be a significant day in Scotland. I mean, it's actually Tartan Day in the United States of America and Canada, so it's one of these occasions which is probably more noticed overseas than it is in Scotland. But it should be noticed in Scotland. I studied the Declaration of Arbroath at St Andrews University when I decided to do Scottish history. This was an amazing ambition, incidentally. You know, trying to study Scottish history at Scotland's oldest university in the late 1970s, I would say 80s if you'd believe me, incidentally, but in the late 1970s, I mean, it was easier to get drugs in St Andrews University than it was to study Scottish, much easier to get drugs than it was to study Scottish history. You went to a wee door in St Salvator's Triangle, you knocked 3 times and asked for Joe, and if you were lucky, they let you into Scottish history. But when I eventually got in the door and found I had 3 other folk in St Andrews University were studying Scottish medieval history in the senior honours year, I found myself taught by Professor Geoffrey Barrow. English born, but one of the greatest Scottish nationalists I've ever met in my life. And Geoffrey Barrow had written a book called Robert Bruce and the Community of the Realm. And that's what I want to speak to you about tonight. That phrase, the community of the realm. Because when people think about the Declaration of Arbroath, you know, they think some great words in that declaration, insofar as people think about it, so long as 100 of us been alive, we'll never submit to the domination of the English. That's great. Absolutely right. We fight for liberty alone, which no good man gives down but with life itself. Great words. Absolutely fantastic words. There's a concept which I rather like, which introduced the idea of democracy, or at least accountable government, let's put it that way. Popular sovereignty, where they said, you know, good King Robert, that's what they called Robert de Brew, incidentally, Robert. Rather like William Wallace the Welshman, our greatest heroes, incidentally, weren't, how shall we put it, indigenous Scots. They came to Scotland, or their families did, and like many patriots, you should judge people on what they do when they get here. That's how you judge people. But the Declaration of Arbroath, as Geoffrey Barrow taught me, wasn't just sealed by the barons and the nobles. People say, oh, that was all the nobles. They just got together and said they would get good King Robert. Well, there's two things about it. One, they said, good King Robert has saved us from the English. He's won the right to be our king by the battles he's fought and won. And then they went on to say, but incidentally, if he ever lets us down, betrays our rights, sells us out, we'll get somebody else. And introduced for the first time, sparkling into medieval history, into the European ideas, the idea of popular sovereignty. Ideas that hundreds of years later were to influence the American Declaration of Independence. The 20 years or so back when Tartan Day started, most historians over here mocked the idea that somehow the Declaration of Arbroath could have influenced the Declaration of Independence, which the American historians were convinced it did. When George W. Bush, in the only sensible thing he ever did in his life, signed a declaration to make Tartan Day, the 6th of April, the representative day to commemorate the Declaration of Arbroath. So the influence of that sparkling idea that if your king's no yes, get another one, should give lots of pause to thought for King Charles at the present moment. I have to say, I was, for some of you, I did a programme on Sunday. I met a lady who phoned in. Stand up a second. Tell me who you are.
Jacqueline.
And Jacqueline, you phoned in.
Yeah.
And was I any yes?
Yes.
Did I answer your question?
Never asked you one.
There you are. I even answered a question that she never asked. But there was a nice wee debate on that programme about the Stone of Destiny. And Michael Cole, let me get that right, Michael Cole, like the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, right? Michael Cole, who is a lovely guy, incidentally. Well, slightly on the pompous side, but a lovely guy. I mean, he's actually more royal than the royals. He used to be the royal correspondent of the BBC. And you know, I think he'd make an excellent king. King Michael would be first class, in my opinion. But he was kind of bemoaning the fact that there was this suggestion that the Scots, i.e. me, because he's going to be all right with Humza, believe me, might no give them back the property they stole from us for 700 years because we had said in the 1990s, or Michael Forsyth did in our behalf, remember him, that we're only going to borrow back our own property and return it for the coronation. He was appalled. He thought it was incredibly small-minded to have the temerity to suggest that perhaps we won't give you the Stone of Destiny back until you recognise what it represents. Scottish sovereignty, Scottish nationhood, the right of Scotland to decide its own future. And a lovely guy, Andrew, from Dubai, who's written a book about the Stone of Destiny, who was exceptionally good. And the pair of them were going hammer and tongs, and I was adjudicating in my usual fair-minded way. But back in the day, Geoffrey Barrow said to me about the community of the realm, because that is the most important phrase in the Declaration of Arbroath. It says, we the nobles, the barons of Scotland, as Tasmina rightly said. And Tasmina, can I just say, you would have been an excellent baron of Scotland or anywhere else. The barons of Scotland, the nobles, and then it goes on, and the whole community of the realm. Well, who were they talking about? Well, it can't be the barons or the nobles, because they're already mentioned. It's not the king, because it's about the king. It's not the prelates and the bishops, because they were all behind independence, and they were writing the thing for the barons and the nobles. This community of the realm, what does it mean? It meant everybody else. It meant us lot. All of us. All of us. And if we grasp nothing else from this anniversary of that declaration, hang on to that phrase, the community of the realm, because that's what's going to be necessary if we're going to take Scotland back to freedom and independence. Now, some years ago, 2012, I signed another declaration, the Treaty of Edinburgh, as I called it, between myself and David Cameron, the then Conservative Prime Minister. And it was about having the referendum in 2014. And quite interestingly, the day I signed that treaty, that Declaration of Edinburgh, there was a poll showing support for independence at 29%. I remember it well. I was bloody annoyed about it. You know, I said to myself, this is a very inconvenient day to have such a poll, just when things are going so well, you know. I had David Cameron seated looking at a map of yellow, just in case he forgot who'd won the election. There was folk demonstrating outside, you know. Could hardly hear herself speak from folk chatting outside, and not every chant was affectionate about David Cameron. It was fantastic. I suggested at one point, I think, Prime Minister, perhaps, leaving through the back door might be... I was having a great time. Then I see this poll showing independence at 29%. The SNP were at 50% in the same poll. In other words, support for the SNP was much greater than support for independence, and that was how things were. But gradually, as we moved into the referendum campaign, and the community of the realm were unleashed on that campaign, then things started to change. As Tasmina rightly said, if it had been left to the Asian community, we'd be independent by now. But our challenge was to win a majority, and we didn't win a majority, but what we won was something else. What we won was the assertion and the realisation by many people who'd never really countenanced the idea before that Scotland was a hair's breadth away from winning its freedom. And when I left the leadership of the SNP, I did so a happy person, not a delighted person, but a relatively contented person, because looking at opinion polls showing us at 57% for a Westminster election, with independence back in the lead as it was, as people encountered what they call buyer's regret, or in this case, non-buyer's regret, back in the lead, and the SNP membership surging forward to 85,000, all of whom had paid up. I was thinking to myself, okay, it's not going to happen next year or the year after, but it's a pretty well a shoo-in for the next decade, because there are few occasions in history where such a momentum can build up without going to the realisation of independence and national freedom. Now, 8.5 years later, the situation is entirely reversed. Support for independence is at 47%, according to the last 5 opinion polls. But support for the SNP, you may say not unsurprisingly, is down somewhere in the 30s. Things have turned on their heads. We're now in a situation where support for the political party is much less than support for independence. So the question is, what are the independence supporters who are disillusioned for one reason or another with the SNP and the SNP Green government, and I can think of one or two, what are they going to do? Are they going to go back to voting for the Labour Party as they did previously? Are they going to subject Scotland to another 50 years of Labourisation? And incidentally, some of the things that are wrong with the SNP right now, those of us old enough can recognise them absolutely from the Labour Party of the 80s and 90s. Or is something else going to be provided? And where we stand right now, how do we turn where we are now into the realisation of independence? Well, we can't just say we'll have a referendum because I've got news, we're not going to get one. I mean, I did say last summer, when the idea was mooted by Nicola Sturgeon, that going along to the United Kingdom Supreme Court and saying politely, excuse me, can you give us advice of how to dissolve the United Kingdom, wasn't the most amazing strategic move I've ever heard. I mean, excuse me, Lord Reid, can you please tell me how we can go about unseating you from your position? Because if there's no UK, then there won't be a UK Supreme Court. The Lord Reid would have to have been a man who put everything above his own interests if he came to any other conclusion than to shake his head seriously and say, no, I don't think that's within your powers. And my bum will be safe on this seat for some time to come. And then the second leg of the strategy was to make the next election a de facto referendum. Wait a minute. Why should any one election be a de facto once and forever referendum? That's daft. Any election allows people to make choices. If you make the choice, independence for Scotland, and a majority of people vote for it, then you've got the right to expect it to happen. Not one election, every election should be about independence. So bearing in mind the Declaration of Arbroath, that resounding phrase from our history, the community of the realm, where should we go now? Well, one, that the SNP government, I was going to say the SNP Green government, but if I include the Greens, there's no chance of this happening, should get back to running the shop efficiently and competently. They should look at the issues across Scotland right now and probably decide that 1 million Scots suffering fuel poverty in a land of energy plenty might be just higher up people's list of priorities than changing the gender identification legislation. Even if self-identification was a good idea, which it's not, but even if it was, what sort of tactics is it to say we're going to challenge the authority of the Westminster government? What are we going to challenge them on? Is it going to be 1 million Scots in fuel poverty in our land of energy plenty? Is it going to be self-determination for the Scottish nation? No, it's going to be on self-identification, which 3/4 of the population don't know what it means and the other quarter don't like it. It's not a question of political strategy, it's a question of common sense. Concentrate on running the Parliament efficiently and well to build up people's confidence in the prospect of running an independent Scotland. Concentrate on the issues that matter to people. And given that, and this is why I said I'm not sure that this advice would be taken by the SNP Green government, given that just about every policy disaster befalling the Scottish National Party in recent times has had green fingers all over it, then it might be a good idea to say couldn't we have a go at exercising our mandate and govern as we were instructed to by the electorate, as opposed to, for some reason, believing that a majority in the Parliament produces a majority in the country. The two things are not the same. Secondly, the SNP brand has been somewhat tarnished. Tarnished over recent years by the failure to pursue its mission of independence for Scotland, because without that, the SNP is nothing. That's what it was founded for. That's what its mission is. That's what it should be doing. Everything else should be secondary to a national party. The achievement of national independence and the use of that independence and power to benefit the community of the realm. A national party that doesn't do that is not a national party. That brand has been tarnished and will, unfortunately, going to be tarnished more. I was asked yesterday by a number of journalists, 100 perhaps, are you really delighted today to see what's befallen the SNP headquarters? My answer was no. I'm sad at what the SNP has become. Very sad indeed. Sad for the people of Scotland that they can't look at that party as they did previously, even if they didn't vote for it, and look at it with respect and admiration as people who passionately believed in the independence of their country. So what happens now? Well, they need to broaden out. Hamza Yousaf, in my opinion, and he doesn't want my advice, but he's going to get it anyway, should get a drawbridge down between his administration and what has gone before. He should make it absolutely clear whatever happened in the past is not going to happen under his administration. He should renounce for all time the phrase, the continuity candidate. It wasn't a good phrase when he accepted it, and it most certainly is not a good phrase now. He should find the humility to recognise that the SNP, albeit the largest, most powerful entity in Scottish politics, is but one part of the national movement. There are grassroots organisations, there are think tanks, there are pressure groups, all of whom have marched for yes, all of whom have worked for yes. And he should try to recreate that glorious summer of 2014 when all of that came together in a mass movement that scared the pants. I was going to say something else. That scared the pants of the British establishment. That's what he needs to do. We need an independence convention to gather these people together, to plot a strategy and a plan to give independence a priority, not for the never, never, not for the hereafter, but for the here and now. We should look at every single electoral test as the means of achieving independence. The British establishment have chosen to close off the referendum route. Okay, the cards were badly played, it was inept, it was this, it was that, and the next thing. But the fundamental reason they're closing off the route is they think they will lose. We've got to recognise that and certainly embrace the idea of having elections as the test of independence. Not one election, but each and every election. Should ask each party who believes in independence to stand with that first line of their manifesto. We are seeking a mandate to negotiate independence from the British government. And with that line, with a majority, that's exactly what the Scottish government should do. I would also add it might be a good idea at next year's election to have a look across at what happened in Quebec a few years ago, when the Parti Québécois were going through some difficult times. They came up with the idea of standing in the federal elections as the Bloc Québécois and broadening out and taking in people from across the political range and movement. And they went to an unparalleled success in that federal election. It may be time for a Bloc Scottish or a Bloc Écossais, or whatever we want to call it. Maybe we could call it Scotland United. That might be a better way to resist unionists to next year's general election. But from ALBA's point of view, we've been 2 years old as a political party. We're actually 2 years young. Our membership is actually genuinely increasing. We ask people to pay their dues, even if it's £1 a month, to be part of that movement which is growing. And as ALBA rises, with our eye firmly on the next Scottish election, where we know we can win seats, where we know we can build that independent supermajority, a majority can genuinely take on Westminster, and perhaps with the idea that if our colleagues and friends, and we have many in the Scottish National Party, look across and see not the dolts and clowns. I mean, I was asked by one of the media commentators last week, do you genuinely think Humza's useless? That's what they asked me. And I said, no, he's not. For a start, he's better than the Tory guy, the referee. And he's on a par with Anna Sarwar. He's just got a big job in his hands. So perhaps when the SNP look across at a range of phalanx of ALBA representatives, look across at Robert Slavin, look across at Tasmina Ahmed-Sheikh, it will be a salient reminder of the job and the task that that Parliament should be engaged in. The task that was enunciated all of these years ago in 1320. The task of making sure that this nation is proud and free. The task of making sure we use our resources to benefit the community of the realm. And the realisation that right now, at this point in this nation's history, it is only the community of the realm which can take us forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Alex. Now we move to the fun part of the evening, which is the opportunity to ask questions. Now I've got some written questions in, and to start us off, well, I've got one from Peter Hanlon. This is quite a fun one, actually. Peter, where are you? You said you wanted your name to be read out, but you wanted me to ask the question. But I'd like you to ask the question. Go on, Peter.
Just one question for you.
Can you hear?
Why is the SNP so scared of you?
Right, Peter's question is, why is the SNP so scared of Alex Salmond? Robert!
Well, I asked him to ask a question, so did you? Put him up to it. Listen, Alex, we all know why Alex Salmond scares the SNP. They can't look at him, can they? You know what I mean? He's the epitome of what the SNP stands for. The raison d'etre is for independence, and that's what Alex stands for. And he's always going to show them up. So they don't want Alex there embarrassing them. And that's another reason why we want to see Alex back in Holyrood, because he will embarrass him. You know, I know it won't give him any comfort to do that. I mean, you could see the sadness in the man's eyes yesterday with what happened. You know, so nobody's taking any, joy in any of this. But we want Scottish independence, and the way forward was Alex Salmond. He scares the horses in Westminster. He certainly scares them in Holyrood. And I wouldn't like to be fighting against him up there, that's for sure.
I'm not going to ask Alex because he knows the answer to that question. Next question is from John Orlick. A lot of the questions, understandably this evening, are about the SNP, what's happening in the SNP. And I think it's fair, a lot of us have got friends, former colleagues, people we care about who are members of the SNP and are in a really difficult place, not of their own making, many of them. And we should remember that. A question from John. Where's John Orr? Right, would you like, what's the shy type stuff in Coatbridge that we want the chair to ask the question? Oh, you're from Edinburgh? Oh.
That explains it.
John, would you like to ask your own question? I'd like to hear from you, John. Right, in a big loud voice, your best Edinburgh voice.
Oh yes, I remember it well.
And I
And you were shot a fiver, I remember.
It's always a pleasure to meet you, Alex, because you were one of the few politicians that came along to visit us at the Vigil back in the 90s, back in the day, because I was a member of the Vigil on Regent Road in Edinburgh. Back in the day, indeed. It was, my question really is, what has happened to the SNP? Is it a combination of complacency, hubris, or is it a combination of bad policies as well that's resulted in the situation that we're in? You know?
Well, John was saying that I should remember him from the vigil back in the outside the old Royal High School in the 1980s and 90s, and I remember him.
I'm sorry to stop you mid-flow, but it's awfully fun sometimes.
Oh.
The people on the left can't hear you, even though your voice carries. So we'll just keep going.
Well, he's got the microphone on. See that? It doesn't matter about me. One word from Tasmina who gets the microphone on. He's a wise man. I'll tell you sometime, maybe not just now, I'll tell you in the ALBA party we have certain key initials. FOT. Fear of Tas. And in the chair, woe betide anyone. For those of you who are thinking of joining the ALBA party, obviously we're a friendly, engaging, but dinna cross the chair if you come to the conference. The point about John said to me, he said, do I remember meeting him at the vigil outside the Royal? I do, John. There was your mum and dad, your grandfather, and you were in the carrycot. I remember it well. And we've been campaigning for a long time. The purpose, John, of thinking about events in the last few days, I think is to get a hold of what started this whole farrago. What started the whole farrago was that people were asked to give money for the referendum campaign, and the referendum campaign didn't happen. And the money wasn't there, whatever. Now, I honestly don't know if that aspect of the inquiries, and there may well be other aspects, if that is a criminal offence or no. To some extent, to me, that's secondary. Because whatever it is, it's a breach of faith. You see, if you say people, we're having a referendum in October this year, incidentally. For those of you who have forgotten, October the 19th is the no ifs, no but referendum day that we're meant to be having. But if you say to folk, give us the money and we'll spend it on the referendum campaign, don't deliver the referendum campaign, then whatever else it is a breach of trust and a breach of faith. And a political party doesn't understand that you cannot do that to your electorate, supporters, believers, and people in Scotland who believe in independence above all, because they are people, by and large, like you and me, John, who have argued for the cause when it didn't seem an immediate possibility, but did it because it was an act of faith and an act of justice and an act of hope for the future. These are not people you should let down. And that would be my essential sadness about the events of yesterday. But look, I loved the vigil at the time. I loved it in particular because I remember Michael Forsyth telling me how much he hated it. And many things I've judged in politics, but one of them was to agree with things that he disagreed with and to love things that he hated. So congratulations to you and your carrycot at that vigil. Well done, you, John.
I've been asked by Indie Live, just for the sake of microphone purposes, if I can ask all of the questions. And you don't like to cross me, Alex, I don't like to cross Indie Live, without which nobody would be able to see all of the events happening across Scotland. So I'm going to do what I'm told. And it's all the Johns, because the next question is from John Park. John Park, where are you? I need to know you exist, right in the front here. John's question is, do the panel think that the Yes movement should be organising to demand an early election in view of the short leadership campaign, which indeed some have questioned, and of course the ongoing police investigation? Robert, I'll come to you first. Do you think we should be organising an early election / referendum?
Absolutely. the quicker we get another election for us to get it going forward, I'll be up for that 100%. I think the mood's changed in Scotland. We've seen that anyway. We can see people are waking up to the fact what's been happening, and I do think most folk, well, the independents voting folk, we get that campaign that we're going to go for election. I think we would win it. I really do. I think we would win it. You know, so on me, yes, I would go for it. I would go for it. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I would certainly go for the early election.
Well, of course, the early election at Holyrood would be up to Humza. And I'm not certain, Robert, he's going to go for it like you. I think he's got other priorities in his mind right now. But I'll tell you what, I mean, Robert's absolutely correct to focus on elections, because we know there's going to be a Westminster election next year. And as I was saying, if you're planning to fight that Westminster election and looking to get a majority for independence, then the best thing to do would be to bring the Yes movement, the independence movement together and fight it with a common candidate in each constituency. That would have two great benefits. One, that the Yes side, the independence side, would be fighting with one candidate. The Unionists would be fighting with a number of candidates. I mean, you saw the Tory party reacting to an opinion poll at the weekend, saying they wanted to revive the Better Together coalition. They wanted to get back to a tactical unionist coalition, which has been running informally in Scotland over the last few years. And you saw the Labour Party's reaction. My God, no. What happened to us in 2014? We mustn't be tarred with that brush again. Unfortunately for Labour, they're going to be tarred with that brush for the next generation, if I can use that word in Scottish politics. So I think we hammer the idea of an independence convention. We offer the hand of friendship. I would like to see the independence forces united. And I think the first electoral test will be the Westminster election, and we'll offer to be part of a single block Scottish, a Scotland United candidate in each constituency. So somebody would stand as SNP, Scotland United, ALBA, Scotland United, Greens, Scotland United. And that just shows you how much I believe in Scottish independence. But that would be the way to maximise the independence vote, absolutely. But I'll tell you what, Robert, you and I both know that the task for us is at grassroots level. We've got to take on the unionist parties at local elections. We've got to see our vote rise. We've overtaken the Greens, as Tasmina rightly said. Let's overtake the Liberals, the Tories, Labour, the SNP, and let's see ALBA councillors elected locally. Because as we focus on the 2026 Scottish election, that is going to be our opportunity to make absolutely sure that a Scottish government does, elected by an independence majority among the population, does what it should do and begins negotiations with the British government to secure Scottish independence.
The next question is from Tim Arbuckle. Tim, where are you? And I'll ask the question. Just check. Hi, Tim. Nice to see you. Tim's question: as a husband, father of 3 teenage girls, an ALBA Yes voter and police officer, how will ALBA restore the rights of women and girls? I'm going to start off by saying, Tim, that we've agreed as a party at one of our national councils that we will enshrine the reality of biological sex in a written constitution for an independent Scotland. But that question also gives me an opportunity to pay tribute to, and she's sitting right in front of me, our Equalities convener, Eva Comrie, who wrote our Women's and Equalities policy. That was the first policy passed at our first conference in 2021. Eva's done a power of work on this issue. And our policy is one that speaks of respect for all and rights for all, but not at the expense of women and girls in Scotland. And it's perfectly possible to achieve equality for all when you go about it the right way, much as Alex went about ensuring equal-sex marriage was a reality in Scotland. But let's not get into who turned out to vote or didn't vote and what excuses they had on the day. But I hope that answers your question, Tim. But I'm going to ask Alex and Robert if you want to take this opportunity to reinforce and secure your credentials on this most important issue for the women and girls of Scotland. Robert.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I'm the Taz here, and like Eva is get the policies from the ALBA party. We're for safe spaces for girls and for ladies. We don't want to see this self-ID enacted. You know, it's Tasmina, she articulated better than me. Everybody deserves no respect. Everybody, but not at the expense of somebody else. So we can't have that, you know. It's sensible policies. I think Alex actually put it out better to get round, circumvent this whole problem, is to get a convention together and discuss it like we did with the same-sex marriage. I think that would take the sting out of all of us and all the misinformation, everything. If we get all the groups together and actually debated it, instead of getting hit with in the head all the time, no, you're a transphobe, you're a TERF, or whatever it is. I think we need to all get together, big convention, talk it through. As I say, like Alex did for the same-sex marriage, it would certainly smooth it over in my mind anyway.
Thank you.
Well, I'll answer by uttering the safest sentence in the ALBA party. I agree with Tasmina, every single word that she said.
Now the next question is from Raymond Leslie. Raymond, where are you? You hear that, Raymond? This side's letting us down a wee bit. I'll be expecting some questions from the floor from the right-hand side, but all the questions are from the left. Now Raymond asks whether we should allow IDOCs to run the next independence referendum. And just to be sure that I was making the right point before I made it, IDOCs, of course, is an online voting system. I think that's what the question is about. But it's actually a broader question in terms of who can vote in elections, because there was some concern about whether we have faith in the postal vote system, and perhaps the more recent legislation that requires identification be brought to polling stations for people to be able to vote. So with that in mind, should we allow a company like this to run an independent referendum or the next electoral test as you've articulated? Alex, or can we have some faith in the system as it currently stands?
Well, as far as the referendum is concerned, after the experience of 2014, I think I would say that I like the idea of paper ballots. And I like the idea that all ballots are correctly supervised, because it puts everything beyond question. Let's put it that way. And I'm sure there's many members in the SNP who will have great sympathy for that idea at the present moment. I think we have to pay lots of attention to that. I know everybody says, oh, well, the quickness, the simplicity, etc., etc. But every one of us who's been an invigilator at elections knows the security of knowing that everything is absolutely fair and square. And that would be, in my view, far preferential to the speed of the result or delegating it to some online company. I do think, however, that the electoral test for independence is going to be in an election. I think that is, and I thought Ash Regan put the correct strategy forward to the SNP, given everything that's happened. I mean, obviously, I devised the referendum route to independence. That was a significant move for the SNP at that time, but, you know, times change. And, of course, going up to the Supreme Court, you blocked off one of the avenues. Therefore, you return to the fundamentals. And the fundamentals is ballot boxes count as long as you have it enshrined in your manifesto. And that's what we've got to prepare for now. Taz mentioned the identification system. I mean, one of the other reasons it wasn't a great idea to say let's have a once and for all de facto referendum at Westminster is the next Westminster election is going to be fought with identification. You're going to have to prove your great granny was from Livegate in order to get in the polling station. That is not going to help working class voters. It just isn't, because the most easier form of identification obviously is passports, and many people don't have passports or don't have ease of identification, and the Tories know it, which is exactly why that legislation is being introduced. Luckily, the franchise and the control for a Scottish election is controlled by the Scottish Parliament, And therefore we can expect that Parliament to want to encourage people to vote, not discourage them for voting. And for independents, for yes voters or for election voters, the more people that vote, the better. You know, we had 86% voted in the referendum in 2014, but that wasn't a uniform 86% around the country. Some areas were voting at 95%, some areas were voting at 75%, and many of our best areas were voting at 75%. The more people that get to the polling stations, the more people that vote, the more people have postal votes, the better for the yes movement. Public participation from the community of the realm is the key to our success.
The next question's from Ivor Much. Ivor, where are you? There you are. Well, I was going to read your question for you because I thought it was quite funny because do you wish your name to be read out? And your answer is, and I want to ask you what this means in Coatbridge speak. I'm easy if you want, or I can.
He's no fussed.
He's no fussed. He's no fussed. Ivor's question is, do you believe all cities need the 5 networks of transport, like Prague, to be successful? Train, tram, metro, bus and water network. Some good people in favour here. Coatbridge, Ivor says, had a tram, bus, canal, train 100 years ago, and Glasgow had 5. Is beauty the most important factor to attract and keep people in a place?
Yeah, could I just say about the last one?
Yeah, you can, but I've not finished your own question yet. Ivor's not au fait with the ways of how the ALBA party operates. But it's all right, Ivor.
Well, I thought you finished.
I've not. Up you get. Have your say. Just as long as we can hear you. Stand up.
I thought
Go on.
you finished, sorry.
No problem.
You know, Scotland hasn't been my home for 24 years, okay? I've asked similar questions in Prague, Leipzig and Dresden, and I always asked them, what has made Leipzig so successful since 20 years ago? How's it overtaken? What has made Dresden so successful?
I'm going to repeat what he's saying. Just bear with us.
Yeah, every politician said this. Beauty is the most important thing. If you make it as beautiful as possible, people do not want to leave and people want to come. When the place becomes ugly, people want to leave. I'm not here from this country now, but I'm living in my mum's village up in Glen Davis. What I saw today, what the children have to play in, the football park looks like a war zone from Bosnia, the swing park, the tennis courts it's depressing. Even the attendance, that's what.
Right.
No, it isn't about
Right.
that. It's not about that.
Right. We're not going to have a debate about this, but I'm going to,
Okay,
because everyone over here cannot hear what you have just said,
so that's
and I
why
don't want to keep them
take
waiting.
microphone,
No,
anyway.
no problem. Thank you very much, Ivor. The thrust of what Ivor is saying is how important is beauty and how a country looks to how successful it might be, how successful it is to encourage people to come in and spend time living there from his experience of abroad. Most of the cities. So that's the thrust of the question. Robert Slavin, how important is beauty to Coatbridge?
Well, if you look round about you, it's very important. So it is. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's a lot of transport's very essential for the growth of any city or any small town like this. And in Coatbridge, especially, I can talk for here. Well, we all know about the canal. The canal used to be, it was filtered in, it could fill in, but there was plans before to actually open the canal, but you could go around town, head the locks, come down the main street and back round. Yeah, you can go all the way right up. That would be, I mean, I know it would cost a fortune, but how good would that be for the town in North Lanarkshire? It would be fantastic. It would be something nobody else has had just now. Trams especially. I think I seen somewhere a newspaper report today as well about Glasgow, just something similar you're saying, about most major cities in Europe. They make good use of the rivers, the River Clyde and stuff. They've all got boat tours going on it. They've regenerated it. We've got ours lying like a pigsty. So things like that could really enhance Scotland, and maybe work its way down to other kind of towns and cities. I do think when we get to public transport, we have to make it cheaper and more reliable. I know that's just a trope. Everybody says it, but it's true. That's what we need to try and do. But I do think if we can make your towns and your cities as attractive as possible, you want less graffiti, more welcoming to children, as you say, places to go and play, then it's good for everybody. It's good for the country.
Thank you, Robert. Alex.
Ivor was telling us how in some ways facilities and infrastructure have moved backwards over a period of time. That there were certain things in this community they had many years ago which they don't have now. And I was going to recount a small story. When I became the Member of Parliament for Banff and Buchan in 1987, and I moved into the planned village of Stricken. And we're moving into this wee end house, and I was trying to do my best to renovate it. I'm totally handless, apart from plumbing, but because my granddad was a plumber, but everything else I'm useless at. And I saw this tap in a cupboard. And I said, oh, maybe I should handle this myself, you know, using my plumbing skills, or I should ask the next door neighbour who was a real plumber. So I asked the next door neighbour to come in and have a look at this tap, because I was frightened it might start a leak, you know, and it was in a cupboard. And he said, what you got me here for? And I said, well, it's a tap. I'm just wanting to make sure that it's not connected and it doesn't start flowing in the middle of the night or something. He said, you idiot, it's a gas tap. And the point is that Stricken, when that model village was built in the 19th century, had town gas. And yet in 1987, Stricken, on the very environs of the greatest gas terminal in Europe at St. Fergus, had no supply of gas. And the people who wanted gas to heat their homes, and even now there's a huge differential between the mains gas supply and bottled gas supply, had to take bottled gas. That is an example, rather like you were suggesting. Now, I think the facilities and the infrastructure that you identified is absolutely crucial to any functioning society. And you've travelled and you know that many, many other countries have that, and Scotland has fallen back on basic infrastructure in many ways, particularly in transport. But I'll tell you something, more important even than a beautiful country and beautiful places is a beautiful society. The real lesson about the kids you saw playing in what looked like a war zone, it's not just the facility that they should have of a decent football park or whatever other park it was. It's the fact of what it tells you about the inequalities in Scottish society. That's what it tells you. So yes, we should have beautiful places, absolutely. But we need a beautiful society to enjoy these.
I don't have the name of the person who asked the next question, so I'm going to ask them to identify themselves after I've read it out, because I need to understand exactly what the question is asking. My mother is Scottish, all her family is. I was born in Australia, but been here for 43 years. My daughter was born in Glasgow and is now being told she's not British. She's 19, she's on the electorate, and has been summoned for jury duty. So how is she not British? Or how is she not Scottish is what I want to know. Who asked the question? Yeah, and can you tell us, please stand up if you can, who is it that's telling her that she's not Scottish or British?
The Home Office, we went to the SNP, to the MP, and he says, oh, you're definitely, well, British at the moment. And when he handed the case over to one of his subordinates, she phoned the Home Office, and he gave him a pile of crap, basically. She just says, well, pay up and shut up, basically. And what they're doing is to give you the full story, my mum immigrated to Australia for work in the 70s. And she went to Australia, got married out there, had me and my brother. Our marriage broke down. She came home, also I was ill, and had a better chance with the heart surgery in York Hill Hospital, because it was leading in heart surgery at the time. So she was advised by my heart surgeon as well to come back to Scotland. So that's what she did. So I was here for 6 months old. I've been here for, I'll be 43 next month. And I grew up here. And when my daughter, when she was 15, she's 19 now. When she was 15, she went for a passport. And they said, they didn't even ask her, is your mother settled? How long has she been here? They just seen British, Australian birth certificate, decided, no, you're not British, you need to within 2 weeks to be considered for citizenship, and if, well, if she doesn't get the consideration, she needs to pay another £1,300 for another consideration. In 2 weeks, how's a 15-year-old kid supposed to get that kind of money? And she's got a national insurance number, she's on the electorate, and she just recently got thingy for jury duty. How's she not British?
What's your name?
Joanne.
Joanne. Thanks very much. I hope you all heard that question. It's rather a specific question relative to proper representation. I hope you'll be getting, but it doesn't sound like it, Joanne. All I can say is the Home Office is not known for good judgment in anything, I should say, of late, not least in relation to their disgusting treatment of people in need. And of course it makes the case why immigration, I was going to say, should be devolved to those who are capable of managing it, but let's just say immigration and such matters would be handled much better in an independent Scotland. But I don't know, Alex, if there's much you can answer in relation to that point. I'll pass you over to Alex, Joanne.
Well, Joanne, you've gone to your Member of Parliament. You should make sure, I hope you've met them personally on this. Well, meet them personally, eyeball them at a surgery. Any Member of Parliament worth their salt would be battering the Home Office on a daily basis until they conceded the justice of the claim that you've put forward. So that's what you should do in terms of the individual, because it's a strong, overwhelming claim, and there is discretion within the nationality provisions. And the case you've just outlined is an overwhelming case for the exercise of that discretion, and your MP should be raising it daily, as any good MP would be doing. And to get them to do that, or her to do that, then eyeball them at their surgery. Never mind about the letters. Sometimes some MPs don't look at all their correspondence. Eyeball them. And I wish you good fortune with that. Just more generally, many differences between Scotland and England as societies. Many similarities, actually, but many differences. And one is our experience of immigration and emigration. You see, there's hardly a family in Coatbridge, there's hardly a family in Scotland who haven't experienced emigration. And any of us, certainly folk of my age, but folk a lot younger as well, if you think about your childhood, think about great family occasions, there was always somebody had visited great Auntie Ina in Canada or wherever, or the American relatives were coming back for somebody's wedding. I remember at my sister's wedding, my mother went to enormous trouble to put up our American relatives in the Westport Hotel, only to have their bed collapse in the middle of the night. She was black affronted, which turned to anger when the proprietor of that hotel, not something that would ever happen in this fine establishment, told her she wasn't getting a refund because it was an act of God. Every one of us has a range of relatives across the world. And I've always thought one of the reasons why I hope and believe and trust in my faith that we are a welcoming country to those who've come to be with us and to be part of our community is because we understand immigration. If you understand immigration, you understand immigration. And you know, it's no bad thing, incidentally. I mean, they talk about people, they're economic migrants. Yeah, like the Scots who populated half the globe. What do you think they were doing? If they weren't forced out in the clearances, they were economic migrants. And you know what these economic migrants did? They built Australia, they built Canada, they built New Zealand, they contributed to the building of America. They did not bad as economic migrants. But my great fear for Scotland is not immigration, which, I mean, obviously immigration paralyses English society at the present moment, and certainly the English politics. But England's this amazing country. You know, it seems to be possible to get in without a passport and wee boats, but impossible to get out with a passport and big boats. It's an extraordinary country, England. I'm not actually sure, how shall I put this gently, every single one of these impoverished people fleeing tyranny and deprivation, I think they've got this idealised view of English society. But nonetheless, the different contrasts between our two nations. The danger facing Scotland isn't immigration, it's emigration. At the point of independence, every single person who's part of our society, who lives here, who works here, who contributes to our society, will be an automatic citizen of the new Scotland. Automatic. No payment. Just the down payment of sweat and work and ideas and imagination. And many, many people overseas. I mean, Ireland did an amazing thing. A generation or two ago, they opened up Irish citizenship to just about everybody. They trawled the world. I mean, they had to pay for it, admittedly, but nonetheless, they realised that the extension of Irishness was a great economic and political strength, as we must realise that the extension of Scottishness is our great strength, one of our great strengths. We mobilise that diaspora, it'll be an important ally in the progress to independence, and it'll be an even more important ally in the success of independence. So let's embrace the people who are here. Invite more people to come, and let's build this country upwards, not let it go downwards in a spiral.
Before I move to the last written question, I'm going to ask Denise, how long do we have for the Indie Live live stream? In 10 minutes, Indie Live live stream, finished 10 minutes. Okay, so this is the last written question, but we will continue with questions from the floor when we have to say goodbye to the Indie live stream. This question is from Robert Crawford, and we've touched on it briefly, but we're going to come back to this. Is about, in the last referendum, there were instances of voting irregularities, and a lot of people still feel very strongly about this. What measures can be taken to ensure that this doesn't occur in the next referendum? And forgive me if I speak out of turn, Alex, but I'm sure I recall you saying on occasion that you wished that you had indeed instructed an exit poll at the time of the referendum on that 18th of September to find out what really might have been the result if we were to have gone by such an exit poll. But with that thought in mind, and again, I hope I haven't spoken out of turn or answered the question for you, what can we do to ensure that every vote cast for freedom for Scotland is counted as a vote cast for freedom for Scotland?
Well, you're quite right. I mean, I have said that. And believe it or not, I look back and not every choice I made in the referendum campaign that's run up was perfect. There's the most you'll ever get from me, nearest possible as an admission. But then, you know, we live and learn. That's the whole point. That's the point about life. It's the point about politics. And one of the lessons to learn is when we get the chance again, I think it'll be more likely to be an election than a referendum now. But we have to make sure that I believe in paper ballots because they can be looked at and supervised, and everybody knows they're fair and square. The postal ballots must be supervised and with constant vigilance to make sure they are fair and square, just so as everybody knows that the referendum stroke election, and we must encourage people to vote. And you can't encourage people to vote by imposing new restrictions on how they vote and who they vote and where they vote. So the maximum participation and the maximum vigilance in terms of the vote itself.
Thanks, Alex. So it's 9:15, so we've got 10 minutes for questions from the floor. And before I ask Robert and Alex to wind up their remarks, and we say farewell to all of those watching us on Indie Live. So, yes, I'm going to take you first, sir, in the front.
Taking in board what you just said about voting and what Westminster's trying to put in place to block working-class people voting, should the Scottish Parliament introduce an ID specifically for voting which every citizen is provided with, so as there is no financial barrier to allow people to vote?
Thank you. Your name? Matthew. Matthew. So the question from Matthew is, should the Scottish Parliament introduce an ID card just for the purposes of voting, to make sure that it's not used for any other purpose and every Scot is enfranchised in incoming elections? Alex.
Right, in all meetings, in every meeting, you come across some really, really good ideas. And we just heard one. Because, you know, what Matthew's saying is rather than just be bystanders, as Westminster introduces a prohibition for many people in voting by demanding certain types of identity, at least the Scottish Parliament could offer, not compulsory, but offer people a form of identification without cost. That's a first-class suggestion. And let me, through Independence Live, commend it to Mr. Hamza Yusuf. See, Hamza, you used to think my ideas were quite good ones. Well, you don't have to worry. This wasn't my idea. It was Matthew's idea, and I think it's a very good idea indeed.
I think we've just secured either the Eagle Inn Declaration or the Coatbridge Declaration, and that is every Scot should have the opportunity and entitlement to vote in every election, regardless of their own personal circumstances. And what a good thing to come from this venue tonight. Yes?
Hi, how do we get back the 6,000 square miles of our maritime waters that Tony Blair stole?
How do we get back our 6,000 or so square miles of maritime water that, I quote, Tony Blair stole? Your name? Karen. Alex?
Well, Karen's quite right. I mean, in 1999, while we were all taking part in the exciting adventure of the first ever Scottish Parliament election for, well, actually, in terms of election, the first ever democratic election for the Scottish Parliament, myself, Donald Dewar, and these other folk, the pair of, well, we're all doing it. And while we were busy doing that, a Westminster committee was annexing 6,000 square miles of Scottish fishing waters. Now, after this happened, behind our backs, as it were, I said to Donald, I said, when he was First Minister, I said, Donald, why did you let that happen? And he said, well, they didn't tell me either. So not only did Mr. Blair keep it a secret from me and the Scottish people, he kept it a secret from Donald Dewar. So it was a huge injustice. I have to say that you're right to point to it. You're right to use it as an exemplar of the moral tale that it tells. But if we can get back the other 5 million ones under Scottish control around the coastline of Scotland and an economic zone unrivalled in the continent of Europe, with, yes, a quarter of the offshore wind deployed energy and licensed energy in terms of that. I mean, the SNP Green Party running away from what is an obvious reality in terms of what has been obviously licensed just now. If we can get back that economic zone with the 12 billion of additional revenues that the Chancellor of the Exchequer is, well, 80 billion, I should say, 60 or 80 billion, huge revenues the Chancellor of the Exchequer is expecting from the North Sea. If we can get hold of that, then we'll probably, in our charity, overlook the 12,000 acres that was stolen from us back in 1999.
Sandra Sweeney, where are you? Sandra, you here? Because your daughter's outside waiting on you and she sounds pretty miffed that you're not answering your phone. So, Sandra Sweeney, please exit the building. Next question, please. Yes, right in the front.
It's just a very quick one on the voting again. Whatever vote goes forward, whenever there's a vote takes place in Scotland, it's got to be above board. It's got to be cast iron, and we've got to be able to trust it. I was looking back through some photographs that I've got on my computer, and I found we moved house. We moved to Edinburgh in 2017, and we got our mail redirected. We got voting papers to vote in the Westminster election in Airdrie. We got voting papers to vote in the Westminster election in Edinburgh. There should be one vote per person. These things shouldn't happen. Another thing, the exact same, I went to Alec Neil years ago with the same suggestion that we should have ID for voting, and it should be provided by the government. You should not be able to walk in and just say, I am such and such. Dead people shouldn't be able to vote. People who can't be bothered and somebody else goes along for them or knows they're not going to be there shouldn't be able to vote. It must be above reproach.
Thank you. I mean, that's really just a comment about who shouldn't and shouldn't be able to vote in elections, i.e. people who are dead shouldn't have a vote, or people who have left the country shouldn't have a vote. Are you talking about parliamentary elections or leadership elections? Yeah, you got it one. Thank you very much. Next question. Oh, you've had a shot. Yeah, gentleman at the back.
It's
just to ask if Alec will be all under one banner and speak at Glasgow Green. That would be fantastic. We could make it.
Noted. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, gentleman at the back.
Alec, what's your views on Salvo?
What's your views on Salvo? Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Well, I admire the idea that we should advertise our case in every international arena we possibly can. I think that's a fantastic, and I think it's well worthwhile chronicling that case, taking it. But there is a lesson from history, okay? We were talking earlier about the Declaration of Arbroath. Now, if you like, the Declaration of Arbroath, which was a letter to Pope John, that was an example in medieval times of going to the International Court of Justice today, going to the United Nations. But think about that Declaration of Arbroath and the circumstances in which it was made. The circumstances that Bruce had won Scotland back. He was appealing for recognition, having re-established Scottish control over Scotland. And it's highly significant, because the number of times international bodies recognise you before you're independent are very, very few and far between. The international recognition, which is important and well worth doing and well worth seeking, is actually after you've established your democratic mandate in Scotland and you look to the international bodies to reinforce it. That would be the one thing I'd say. You know, going to the international court, seeking international opinion, as ALBA has done recently, and we'll be publishing that very soon, about Scotland's rights as a nation, about the history, the constitutionality, about the claim of right, and what it means, and what popular sovereignty is run as a golden thread through Scottish history, is the right thing to do. But the battle is going to be won here. It's going to be won in Scotland, in the community of the realm, and then, of course, the friends we've built up internationally will legitimately appeal to come to our aid, to legitimise and to secure and to recognise our independence.
I've got time for one final question, certainly while we're on Indie live stream, before we close up for this evening. In the back in the corner. Yep, sir.
Given that the UK government is just about to make Northern Ireland the commercial hub of Europe, which is against the Treaty of Union, what are we going to do about it?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Alex, I know you're... No, I've asked Robert to concentrate on his closing remarks.
Okay.
Alex.
I shall follow your instructions, Madam Chair. You put your finger on one of the most important political developments of not just this year, but of the last 10 years. The Windsor House Agreement, let's give it its royal title, shows exactly how you can handle a situation where part of a territory is in the single market, but also has preferential access to the rest of the UK market. The one honest, true thing that Boris Johnson said in his puff was it was the best of both worlds. And Northern Ireland, who didn't unanimously want to have the best of the both worlds, got it. And I shouldn't say they didn't want it, because a majority of the representatives in Northern Ireland do want it and recognise the opportunity. But of course, the salience of this is what are we be doing in Scotland? Well, Northern Ireland, against some of their interests, but against some of their wishes, got presented with this magnificent opportunity. We should be saying exactly, day and daily, if it's good enough for Northern Ireland, it's good enough for Scotland. If it's doable in Northern Ireland, it's doable in Scotland. Let's have no more nonsense about customs posts at the border. Let's just fling the words of Rishi Sunak back in his face. He was even more enthusiastic than Boris Johnson. If you listen to Rishi Sunak, he just negotiated the best thing in history. Therefore, if it's possible to do that, it's possible for an independent Scotland to be in the single market and have preferential access to the rest of the UK market. And one thing, what does that mean? Well, even with the agreement as it stood over the last couple of years, I didn't notice any customs posts in the Irish Sea. What you were talking about was checks at businesses. Now they can be made better, and hopefully the Windsor House Agreement, and don't get me wrong, I support it. But I support it not just for Northern Ireland, I support it for an independent Scotland, trading with a single market and having access to the UK market. And then that won't just be the best of both worlds, it'll be the best of all worlds for Scotland.
Thank you, Alex. It's 9:26, so I'm going to now move to closing remarks to meet our 9:30 live stream deadline. Robert.
Thank you, Taz. Just in closing up, I just think I'd like to add for me is that we all start working together and we try and push this convention, because frankly, Humza Yousaf's suggestion of getting a junior minister in for independence is not really filling me with much confidence, especially during the week when he turns around and says his boss Angus Robertson is going to do all the heavy lifting. Now, Angus Robertson couldn't lift a helium balloon if it had independence on it. You know what I mean? Progress Scotland, have you heard of that? No, neither have I, you know. So that doesn't fill me with confidence. What we've got to do is stay positive. Realise we've turned a corner in the road. We have to keep this positivity going. We have to keep pushing for the convention. Make sure all the parties, all the organisations, everybody's pushing for independence gets in that tent, and we move forward from there. Really, that's all I want to talk about tonight. And I must say, Alex has been superb. Everything he's coming tonight, fantastic. Thanks very much for your company, guys.
And Robert raises a really good point about the newly appointed Minister for Independence, Jamie Hepburn. As a Scot and as a nationalist Scot, I find it insulting that a Minister for Independence is appointed by the National Party of Scotland, as they so proclaim themselves to be. Every single representative of that party should be a Minister for Independence every waking moment of their lives. And with that, I now pass to the best First Minister for Independence Scotland has ever had, Alex Salmond.
I'm certainly not at this stage in the proceedings, having navigated my way safely through the last couple of hours, going to contradict our wonderful chair, Tasmina Ahmed-Sheikh, a woman who will be speaking at the All Under One banner rally that was mentioned. But I don't actually mind Jamie Hepburn getting 100,000 quid to be the Minister of Independence, on the basis that, of course, there is a Minister for the Union. And the Minister for the Union in the UK government was a post inaugurated by Boris Johnson for himself, and then it was carried on by the one whose name I can never remember, and then it is now Rishi Sunak. They are the official Minister of the Union in the Westminster Parliament. And furthermore, they have a budget not of £100,000, but of £10 million. Now, the question that should be asked is, what has happened to this £10 million since Boris Johnson introduced the post 4 years ago? Has anybody here seen this £10 million? Did Boris Johnson come into the Eagle Inn and stand his hand and say, here's a pint for the Union? I want to know what's happened to this money. This money for the Union that they've been spending somewhere on something over these last 4 years. So I do think it's a bit rich for unionists to complain about poor Jamie Hepburn and his 100,000 when they've got 3 successive Prime Ministers with a budget of 10 million. But there is a point to what Tasmina said, and that is that every single representative in our Parliament who's given the privilege of ministerial status should be a Minister for Independence. And the most important Minister for Independence should be the First Minister of Independence. And if I'd thought of that and a budget of £10 million, wow! I'd have been round Coatbridge and stricken and Coatbridge. I'd have had to come here twice, like the wee ALBA book meetings. Everyone, it's been a rip-roaring 50-second meeting of the wee ALBA book tour. And it tells you one thing: if you have a success in Coatbridge, then you should come back again If you're coming back to Coatbridge, then you come back to the Eagle Inn.
Alex, I'm going to answer your question as to what the Minister for the Union has been doing, because I looked this up on Wikipedia because I was so interested. And the answer is, and believe me, look it up, absolutely nothing. There's nothing on the page entry, apart from who it is that's been self-appointed, on what budget that they've got. Quite incredible. Anyway, with that, this brings us to the end of our meeting. And as we started on the declaration of Arbroath 703 years ago, you know, while 100 of us remain alive, we will indeed fight for freedom. And in the Eagle Inn in Coatbridge, I'm sure there's more than 100 of us here alive and fighting for freedom. We shall do. And with that, thank you very much to all of you online who've joined us from Indy Live. Keep fighting for independence. It's coming for us.
Can we have a vote of thanks, a Coatbridge vote of thanks to our wonderful chair, Miss Tasmina Ahmed-Sheikh.